All right. Lynda Roth, good morning. How are you this morning?
Good morning, Laurie. I'm just fine. Thank you very much.
It is awesome to be here with you, Lynda, this morning. We are live on LinkedIn and YouTube, and it's pretty cool how social media has brought us together. After I was on a panel, you had reached out. It was on a mergers and acquisitions panel, and you reached out and you said, I think we are kindred spirits. So I thought we would just start with some brief introductions for anybody who doesn't know me. Certainly, they might not know you. And well, let's talk about digital transformation. So I'm Laurie Barkman. Welcome, everyone. This is a series that we're doing to talk to people about different themes. My firm, SmallDotBig, focuses on innovation, growth, and transition in small and medium-sized companies and privately held companies, founder-led companies, family-led businesses. And Lynda, you are someone who has worked in this industry as well, because this market, I know it's resonating with you, right? You're a digital transformation consultant for more than 30 years. You've written a book about digital transformation. And I know this is a topic that you think is super valuable to business owners. So welcome.
Well, thank you. Yes, Laurie, I think this is a very important topic, and especially in the last year. I mean, when I started writing the book, it was before the pandemic, and felt an urgency to encourage owners and CEOs of primarily privately held mid-market companies that they needed to look at what digital technologies were doing to the social fabric and what customers were expecting. And I had two very different clients. The first client knew that his business was losing value because he wanted to sell it, and his investment banker had told him that his business was losing value. And it was because of new technologies that were taking over what he traditionally did in the marketing space. And so he it took him a while to hire me, but he knew that he had to make some change. He just tried a couple of things that didn't work out first before he hired me to do it. And then he turned it all over to me, and we completely transformed his business. And he was able to sell it at a good profit. And then my next client was a traditional company, and they knew they had to upgrade their 30-year-old ERP system, but that was as far as they were going to go. Anytime I mentioned anything else, they were like, "No, we're a traditional company." So anyway, I felt the urgency, and then with the pandemic and shutting down businesses and how businesses had to pivot, it's even more important now because we're not going to be going back.
Right. You just want to move this a little bit. Okay, well, let's get started. Let's talk about what is disruption.
Well, disruption is, last year was a big one in terms of we were completely disrupted very unexpectedly. But what I call digital disruption is where the digital technologies that have been invented since, let's say, the late 1990s and the early 2000s are completely changing the way we live our lives, and for how both customers, whether they're individual consumers or you're a B2B business, what customers expect you to be able to do and services that you can provide them. And then also the information that we have available, the ability to use artificial intelligence and everything to improve our own businesses and have more insight as to what our customers want, where our suppliers are, etc. And then third, there's a lot of industries and businesses that are being displaced because of digital technologies, and you have to look and find out if you're in that path of displacement.
There's a really good article from 2019 in the Harvard Business Review that basically says disruption is not a result of technology, it's a result of unhappy customers. What do you think about that? Have you seen that article and familiar with the authors?
I haven't seen that particular article or the authors, but I do agree with that because my philosophy is digital transformation is business transformation. And while digital technologies are creating new expectations from customers, which is what's making them unhappy in a lot of cases, in some cases, it can also be just that you're not providing the right services or the right products. But customers have a whole new level of expectation today. And a lot of that is because of the technologies that are available to them. So if you just take what Uber has done to the taxi business, for example, right? I mean, before Uber came along, you had two ways of getting a taxi. I lived in Los Angeles for a long time, and good luck getting a taxi if you didn't call 24 hours ahead of time, at least. And then I also did a lot of work in New York. And in New York, you take your life in your own hands to stand out in the middle of the street and try to flag down a cab. They're easily
Right.
available, but you have to live through getting one, right?
Right.
And those were the only ways to get some transportation that was door to door. And so Uber comes along with this nice little app, which was enabled by digital technology, but it was the idea, it was the changing and reframing how we get transportation and who the people are that provide that transportation.
Absolutely. And there's lots of amazing examples. You brought up the pandemic. And so one of the thoughts I had for this discussion was, do you think there's a difference in how we think about disruption pre-pandemic and how we talked about it as business thought leaders and people who are working with companies to say, hey, your customers are looking for change. Things got really accelerated during the pandemic, and there were some B2B businesses that needed to quickly implement B2C technologies. There's one company here where I live, and I'm friends with the owner, and her business is wholesale food distribution to restaurants. Mm-hmm. And so restaurants were closed and there were a lot of challenges, but the food was all on order. What are you going to do with it? And also people wanted to be able to eat. And so they implemented B2C ordering in their business, which was completely new. And they did that very, very quickly. I know there's lots of other examples. So here again, we see this customer demand, right? People needed to be able to get food, and they didn't necessarily want to go to the supermarket. And so there were other examples out there. How do you think about disruption pre-2020 versus where we are today?
Well, disruption pre-2020, business leaders and everybody had a totally different mindset of it. They thought of big things that would impact the economy. They thought of wars, right? Those were big disruptors. They didn't really think, I don't think anybody could have ever foresaw that the United States and then the world would completely shut itself down and business wouldn't go on as usual. So that's a kind of major disruption, kind of like a war would be, or a major economic collapse, but not something that I think anybody saw. Sort of like the Depression of 29, right? I mean, now on that, there were certainly leading indicators that if people had been paying attention, there were leading indicators that a crash was coming. But with the pandemic, there were no leading indicators whatsoever that this was going to happen. And just all of a sudden, one day it was announced that we were going to shut down.
Yeah. The companies that had already started their innovation processes and thinking differently about their business, one of the things that you talk about in your book is that digital transformation really is business transformation. And obviously that's like turning a huge ship. It's not going to happen on a dime. And it takes time and effort, talent, processes to do that. One of the things I find so fascinating on this topic is because ultimately, what's the big why? I think the big why, and I'm interested in your thoughts as well, I think the big why is about creating value. And if you're a company that is, wants to be around for the next 10 generations, if you're a family-led company, or even if you're founder-led and you want to have an exit. And founder-led doesn't mean you're venture-backed. Founder-led just means, yeah, you might have founded the company 40, 30 years ago, but you're ready for, thinking about an ownership transition, and maybe you're starting to think about M&A. So an outside party is going to look at your company and say, okay, how would I value this business? What are the things that make this company saleable, transferable? And technology can be an amazing way to satisfy your customers, generate more predictable revenue with subscription models and other things. So at the core, and this was in your book, is what new opportunities exist because of technology that can increase your business value. And so I want to kind of switch gears on the conversation. We talked about what is disruption, what's happening, and now I want to talk about the big why and what this means for small to medium-sized businesses that are looking to create transferable value.
Well, a lot of small and mid-market businesses have created not necessarily just a single, but they have a, a vision that the original owner had, whether it's the current one or a past generation, of what the company would offer. Let's take both of my clients, right? So one of them was a marketing company, and they their marketing was for the automotive industry, and they sent out the little postcards and reminders and everything about when your vehicle maintenance was due. And their claim to fame was that they had algorithms, fairly sophisticated algorithms based on the information they were taking in, that could fairly actively predict where the vehicle was in its life cycle. Well, this is for a time, this business structure came out during a time when nobody had any idea except the driver, and even the driver didn't know, unless they tracked their mileage, right? Exactly when the last time was they had their oil changed or when they needed to come in. But today's vehicles, you've got sensors all over. The car knows exactly what it needs, and it's flashing it up on the owner's dashboard. So how do you drive the owner back into the dealership, which is what his job was to bring vehicle owners back into the dealership rather than going to an independent repair facility or another dealership that's close to work as opposed to where they bought it, etc. And how are you going to do that? And just having the algorithms that he had wasn't necessarily enough. He had a lot of information about it, and it's a whole different business model now that the driver knows what's going on. And at the time that he was trying to sell his business, the other thing that was happening was all that information that was on the dashboard for the driver was now going to be transmitted to the manufacturer and the dealers through a new technology called telematics. And so technically they didn't really have to have his guidance. So where was his value going to be? And so when I went into his business, I said, the value is all this information that you have collected over the last 25 years about vehicle model behavior, about the dealership and the repair personnel and their performance, about ownerships, especially if you have owners that continue to buy the same model of not model but brand of vehicle from a dealership. And so anyways, you have lots of information here. What we need to do is, in addition to sending out these postcards, which now you're not going to make as much money on those as you used to, but using this information that you have, number one. So we created some business intelligence apps that we could sell on a subscription basis to the dealers and the manufacturers, that gave them a lot of information that was just sitting dormant in the databases that he had. And then number two, how can you make it more self-service? Because the other complaint, which getting back to your original comment of unhappy customers, in where we are today, the model of a sales rep going out and calling on a dealership and sitting down with them and going through, what other marketing messages they might want to send and stuff. The dealers, we don't have time for this, right? And there was a lot of pushback, and it costs a lot of money to do that. You can only see so many customers in a day. So now if you can turn it into more of a self-help process, where the person who's in charge of marketing at the dealership can go in and create their own campaigns if they want to, and potentially get help from you online, right, to do the campaign. Well, then, first of all, you can make a lot more sales, number one, with a lot less cost to do that. And the customer is a lot happier. So it was things like that. And then on the other company, which is a distribution company, a B2B distribution company, their argument was, well, B2B customers don't want the same thing that B2C customers do. And my comment was, the manager or the purchasing agent that is buying from you today, at home, he's on Amazon. He or she is on Amazon. And so they want the same thing from you. They want it easier. They don't want to have to wait for your salesman to come up. They don't want to have to call you. and go through a sales rep and place an order. They want as much self-help as they can get.
I think that's an important thing to acknowledge is the voice of the customer and getting customer feedback and data. I teach a class at Carnegie Mellon called the Corporate Startup Lab, and the process that we use in this master's class, it's a semester's long, so the pace is very, very fast. But what the students and what we do in this capstone is, encourage them to come up with their own ideas, but they have to go test them. They have to get feedback. And it could be in the problem identification stage if they don't really know what the problems are. But then again, later, once they have a minimal viable product or minimal, what we call minimal awesome product, to test and get feedback on all the way through. Is that something that you also have seen the power of in this process?
Oh, definitely. And interesting that you initially used the word minimal viable product is I'm a strong agile supporter. And so you don't want to do something that's going to take a long time necessarily before it can be rolled out to the customer. Customers are much more flexible today and open to give me the beginnings, and then you keep improving it, and I, the customer, may tell you how to improve it, or what I like, and so then it's much easier. Your product development is much easier, and you get your product out to market faster.
It might feel really difficult. If someone's listening, they're thinking, oh, this cannot be for me. I want to quote a friend of mine, Rick Tarian, who loves to say, it's not hard, it's just new. Right.
That's
And if
correct.
someone's listening and, we're talking about machine learning and artificial intelligence and Internet of Things and industrial Internet of Things and all these acronyms, big data, it can kind of seem overwhelming. But I want to break it down and say, well, who is this for? What types of companies can do this? Really, it's any industry. And you shared a couple of examples of different services and other types of companies, but it really spans the gamut, right? Between manufacturing, distribution, and warehousing. Again, it can be services companies, product or service companies. And I know you shared some of your experiences there. So if someone's listening and they're thinking, oh, this isn't for me, I can't do this, this is too hard, what would you say?
I would say it's hard for them because lots of times it's hard to rethink. You've got to get people together to help stimulate your thinking process, number one. Number two, it's much easier to just say, we've been successful doing this for the last X years, right? We'll continue to be successful, and not pay attention to the fact that society is changing. In the book, I talk about the technologies that drove the Industrial Revolution at the beginning of the 20th century, end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. And lots of times people don't think of them as technologies, but they were, right? I mean, the harnessing of electricity, the internal combustion engine, things like that, which is what gave us all the technology that we had, the telephone, everything that we used throughout the 20th century to have our businesses. Those things are all now being disrupted and enhanced. So instead of the telephone giving you instantaneous voice-to-voice communication, you now have the internet that gives you instantaneous communication 24 hours a day, and it doesn't have to be with another person personally. You can go out and interact with the website that the company has set up, and put in your orders, buy. How many of us today shop online, consumers shop online at midnight, right?
A lot. A lot. I used to look at that. We used to look at that data when I worked at American Eagle Outfitters, a retailer that many people might know if they have teens or people, in their family in college. And we would look at time of day, and it was amazing to see people. And this is, even 15 years ago. And so even more so now, where people are finding when is the best time to actually sit down and engage with the company they're choosing to engage with. It's so much more flexible. We're watching TV when we want, right? With on demand.
Right.
We as the consumers have way more tools and capabilities than we've ever had. Let me ask you another question. One of the things you included in the book was mistakes. And what are some mistakes that you want to avoid regarding transformation?
Well, to me, I think the biggest mistake, and this is the one that as we come out of the pandemic, companies are going to have to address because they were forced into making this mistake during the pandemic. And that is by just selecting certain technologies and say, well, I'm going to put up a website, or I'm going to do something else, right? In the case of the pandemic, everybody was forced to do remote work. So, okay, I'm going to implement remote work because my employees now have to have it or want it. And so the mistake that what I call it is implementing individual technologies without having reimagined your business and really thinking about how it all fits together. And we were forced into doing that in the pandemic. And I think as we move out of it, companies are going to have to now take a step back and say, okay, what have we done? What's the reality going to be going forward of what the expectation is? So you were talking about the restaurant industry and the food industry. I do think that people are yearning to get back and being able to sit in a restaurant and communicate with friends and family and have a meal. That is a big part of the reason to eat out. But by the same token, even before the pandemic, you had these companies that had come that were starting out that would send meals to you to prepare yourself. There's also a desire for the family get together meal again, and not just being some frozen food that you pull out of the freezer and stick in the microwave, right? So by putting in so much of the food delivery services or pickup that we had with the pandemic, now families can do that. Is they can have the dinner delivered to them, and that makes preparation a lot faster, so you can put it together real quickly and everybody can sit around and have a meal.
Absolutely. So let's switch gears to talk about actions and how do we make this actionable for business owners or executives contemplating how to think about this process, right? Because this again is you're turning a very large ship here. So how do we get it started? In your book, you talked about a 5-step process for business transformation, and I think that might be a good way to help people visualize, like, how does this work and what's the process we follow?
Well, the first step I had was just to reevaluate your leadership, because you have to look at, do you have leaders, and some of them are board members, could be within your executive ranks, that you're going to have to bring along, or areas that you may have to enhance. Like my last client that I was talking about that was a little bit resistant, they are coming around, and they finally decided to hire what they called a chief customer officer, who was going to be in charge of a lot of the new technologies and how the customer was going to work. So it's an example of they eventually realized they needed to shore up their leadership and have some new blood in, rather than people that had all worked there for 25 years or more. And so that's the first thing. But the big step is what I call reimagining your business. And that's where you need to get together as leaders. I work with companies to do it on a workshop type of basis. But you need to look at backwards. First of all, you need to look at, one, where you are in the supply chain based on what you do. How is your supply chain now changing? So again, if we take a look at some of the what I called in the book the disruptors, Uber, for example, or um, uh, Apple was an innovator, but they disrupted a lot, in terms of um, having digital technologies with what we're doing right now in terms of podcasting, right? I mean, they completely wiped out the CD industry, and the taxi industry is severely hurt from Uber because of thinking of new things. So you've got to look at your business and where you're at and what you supply, and where are you in the supply chain, and is some technology going to come in and threaten your position there? Then the other thing is, how can you help your customers and your suppliers? So one of the things I talk about to businesses is getting more connected at both ends with your customers. I had one gentleman I talked to, he decided that he didn't think he needed to do anything, but one of his complaints was they made the plastic uh, dishes, I call them, for frozen food dinners, and he complained that he always got rush orders. And I said, the reason you get rush orders is because that food manufacturer your inventory is what's called a C-level inventory. They don't care about it. They don't look at it until 24 hours or less when they're going to do a run to make something. Then they realize they don't have all of the containers that they need. So they put in a rush order to you. I said, one way for you to avoid that is get connected to their ERP system. So you know what they're planning in their capacity planning, and you can look at their inventory, and then you can just send them an order to meet whatever they're going to do. That's one thing to do to kind of secure your place or to help a problem that you particularly have. So I think being more connected with your vendors and with your customers on what they want and need, and then looking at what other products and services you can offer. So back to my marketing company example, you know, they had good streams of income because they had contracts with the dealers, and they had contractual requirements to send out these notices, but those notices weren't going to be enough, and they had a wealth. The first day I walked into the business, I said, the gold in your business is this database you have. And so we figured out how to mine that gold and create 2 subscription products for them, which now, are bringing in
Recurring revenue model.
recurring revenue, right? And that is one of the things that brought up the value for the PE company that eventually bought them within 6 months of me finishing the transformation.
That's amazing. That's a great example. And because I think there are private equity firms that are certainly looking at different kinds of industries, but especially manufacturing. There's a lot of, with the silver tsunami, there's a lot of retirements. People want to sell their companies, especially now with maybe this is the third recession, they've kind of been through, and they're tired, and they want to have an ownership transition. And so PE firms that are looking to acquire companies and then improve their processes, improve operations, maybe implement some new technologies, and then, benefit the fund as those things grow, and then sell them. For sure, right? PE firms, but then also this notion of, hey, I want my company to be a sustainable business. I want to see it continue on, the legacy continue on, whether it's family or otherwise. I think that's also another reason why companies would do this. So I guess just sort of wrapping it up and getting to close here, if there were 1 or 2 actionable things, if someone's listening and you say, you got to take these 2 next steps, what would those be?
Well, I think the first step would be, especially now where we're at, is sit back and look at what you've had to make changes for, how you scrambled in the pandemic, what is sticking, and how society is really changing, whether that is whether you're B2C and the consumer is changing, or whether you're B2B. And I think a lot of B2B business is changing more than people think it is, because they see the vulnerabilities in the supply chain. And we're seeing shortages today and stuff like that. So looking at alternative suppliers, looking at being closer connected with your suppliers, things like that. And then what can you use in terms of some of the I hate to use the word information but knowledge technologies today, like predictive analytics, a lot of the artificial intelligence that is available today. There's artificial intelligence and everything in marketing. So like, first of all, just look at your marketing and who your customers are and where they are and what they expect. It's totally different. I think those are the things to get started on. And then secondarily, your employees. You had a recent podcast that talked about culture, and our cultures have changed dramatically. One of the things that gets talked about a lot is that the workplace is no longer going to tolerate that people come to work sick, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Before the pandemic, you talk about the flu. People would come in sniffling and coughing and all that. Nobody thought a thing, oh, everybody's got a flu. And, yes, and everybody knew it was going to go throughout the whole business, but there's less tolerance for that now. And on the employee side, if their children are not feeling well, they're not going to send them to school. They want more flexibility and being able to work from home. There's a lot of studies that show that some people are more productive working from home than or working from wherever they want to work from.
Right.
And so I think those are the kind of things that you need to pay attention to, is that that we are not going back to February of 2020.
Things are different for sure.
That's right. For definite sure.
For sure. So let's end on a high note that there's a lot of opportunity to transform your business, leveraging technology to make your customers happy. And where I work with clients is helping them capture that value in this in the strategic work, but then also working with them to bring it to market. So Lynda, thank you so much for joining me today. If people want to connect with you, what's a great way to find you online?
Well, you can look in my LinkedIn profile by searching on Lynda J. Roth, R-O-T-H. The book is available on Amazon, and that also, by searching on my name, gets it. The website is ljrconsultingservices.com. I'm in the process of bringing up a new one, so I'm working to get that off the road right away. And so, unfortunately, I'm like a lot of people. The thing that you're an expert in, you you drag your own feet. Your what's the old term?
The shoemaker shoes.
Yeah, shoemaker shoes, right.
Totally understand. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I look forward to more conversations with you, Lynda, and really appreciate you having this conversation with me today. And for folks that want to learn more, go to SmallDotBig.com/contact to schedule some time with me. Look forward to speaking with you. All right. Thanks again, Lynda. Take care.
Thanks very much, Laurie. Bye.